Hi everyone, welcome to Spirit Talk for the Allan Kardec Spirit Center of Denver. We host these talks every first Friday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you miss it, don't worry, because you can always watch in our channel. Tonight, the topic is Spiritism, Philosophy, Science, and Religion by Danny Assisi. Danny speaks on the spirituality and spiritism in the US and international. Known for a mix of easy and deep thinking, Dan shares a message of hope and love through rational faith and that both inspire and educate audience for our spiritual nature. Dan is a founding member of the Spiritist Institute. You can also find him as the host for Spiritist Conversations podcast. And professionally, he holds a doctoral degree in education and a master in public administration from the University of Southern California. Then will speak with us from San Diego, California. But before we move to our guests, we would like to invite our friend Aldauri Soprani for our initial message and prayer. Hey, Aldauri, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. So I hope you will take us to the message and then to speak of our guest tonight.
Okay, thanks, Master. All right. Reading up tonight's reading is the book Happy Life, psychographed by Divaldo Franco, inspired by the spirit of Joanna de Angelis. Be tolerant toward your neighbor in the measure that you would expect to receive it. Our today's earth, there is no one whose journey is without error, fear, and torment. These cause affliction when you are trying to do what is right, and they cause suffering when you are trying to appease, requiring understanding and tolerance. For that reason, sow tolerance today in order to reap it tomorrow. This time I'm going to ask everyone to close your eyes and let's pray to Lord to bless us all this evening, especially our guest Danny Assisi. May your teachings, God, reach our hearts and also help us to put those teachings in practice and changing our daily lives. So be it. So without further ado, Danny Assisi.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me here today. I am truly blessed and honored to have some of your time to chat about this topic, which is, near and dear to my heart. I know that these are interesting times that we live in. I know that we all have had to change our perspective on life and perhaps act a little bit different and get accustomed to a different way of thinking and interacting with each other. And this online alternative is one such thing, is our attempt to be close, to be together, to continue our studies, even though we cannot do them in person. So we do understand the format's different than we are accustomed to, perhaps when we get a chance to go to the Spiritist group or to the Spirit Society. But we're very excited to still be able to connect, to still be able to talk and investigate such interesting topics, such as the one that we are going to chat about today. And our topic, as you can see, is Spiritism, Science, Philosophy, and Religion. And clearly, I am very biased. I love this. I love this topic. And I am really looking forward to chat with you for about 40 minutes or so, depending on how excited I get. And then after that, we might have a chance to maybe entertain some questions and kind of interact a little bit. If you are willing to do so, just go ahead and put your comments in there as we go along, whatever the comments are. And we're going to try to tackle those at the end if we have time. So we wanted to say thank you and to let you know that we also want to hear from you. So thank you very much for being here today. All right, so Why is this topic so pertinent, so important to us today? I talked to you about the ever changing world that we find ourselves in, that our lives have pretty much changed drastically in the past 8 weeks. And it's hard to find today anybody in the world that has not been affected by this COVID-19 thing. But another reason why I'm also very excited about this topic is that in 18th of April, 1857, the Spirits book was first published on a beautiful Saturday in the Parisian afternoon at the Dantou bookstore and the Palais Royal, which is a lovely area of Paris. And I think that this milestone that happened 163 years ago, it's something that we don't often internalize, because I think that they symbolized more than just a publication of a book. It marked, at least for me, the beginning of a new way of thinking about everything. And I'm not sure that we give it credit for all that he has unleashed out there in the world. I truly think that we, since then, have been exposed to a revolutionary way of looking at life here and in the hereafter. And we want to talk about that a little bit, because I feel like by understanding the Spirits book and the publication of the Spirits book, we can better understand why is it that Spiritism has this triple aspect that we call. Why is it that he has this scientific approach, this philosophical aspect to it, and this religious or ethical implication? So these three are really connected, and we can better understand them when we go back to the beginning, to the publication of the Spirits book, which is the foundational book from whence everything else came. So when we go back to 1857, with the publication of the Spirits book and that lovely Saturday, which I can only imagine to be a very special day in Paris, France, something started that had not to that day happened yet in our history as a humanity. Yes, today we hold the book and all its different versions and translations, and we are very grateful for the content and for the knowledge that it brings us. But what is behind all of that is the way in which it came about. And when we understand how it was put together and how it came about, we can begin to understand why the science, the philosophy, and the religious or ethical aspects of it are so interesting, and why all of they come together. I am going to tell you something that you might already know if you have been exposed to Spiritism. And if you have not, maybe it's an opportunity for you to kind of revisit some or visit some Spiritist history. But the Spirits book is the compilation. It is the collection of a series of interviews, basically put. What was happening in the world in the 1850s, and we must remember this is a time of scientific revival and growth throughout the world after the Industrial Revolution, with the Age of Enlightenment have already been passed, the arts were flourishing, and all these different things were taking place. What was happening is all of a sudden we found ourselves with more time in our hands because society was getting more efficient and effective, and we had more time to frolic, to go around. And in some places, an interesting phenomena started to take place. Some objects started to move. And of course, that is something that doesn't happen every day. And naturally, it also awakened some people's curiosity, and it was quickly dubbed by others fraud as well, which is very understandable. Amongst the people who are interested in investigating that phenomena was a French educator by the name of Rivel. And Rivel was a well-established and well-known educator in France. He didn't really want to pay attention to this. He didn't have time for these things. But his friends insisted, and eventually he went to one of these seances, which I guess is what people did before Netflix, because they had all this free time in their hands. And he quickly realized that if some objects were moving on the table, or if a table was moving of itself, it could either be fraud or there was something else happening, because tables, as we know, don't have nervous systems and cannot act by themselves. So what he did, he started to investigate to rule out all the fraud and realized that in fact this was an anomalous thing, that's something supernatural, so to speak. These things were moving by themselves, and they were even obeying some commands like table, move to the left. And Kardec understood that they could not be moving by themselves, that something else had to be operating on those tables. And from there, he started to asking questions, and you can imagine how complex that was from the beginning. Yes or no, yes to the right, no to the left, and then tap once for A, tap two for B, and how long it would take. But through this series of communications, Kardec was informed that Reveil at the time was informed that in fact there were the intelligences of people who are just like us, but they have just passed over to the other side and lost their physical body. They were the ones who were moving the objects because they wanted to call our attention to communicate with us. So what started was a very scientific endeavor. Kardec then started to ask questions to these intelligences, which we call spirits, to these spirits who were no longer in a physical body, but were able to manifest and move the tables and objects for a short period of time to call our attention. He started to asking them questions about how's life on the other side. But here's what's really interesting about Kardec's approach. To make sure that this was indeed not a fraud, he not only did that in one place, but he would go into different places with different so-called seances, and he would ask the same questions. Because those people would not know what the answers were in his first places. So he was asking the same questions in different places to see how the answers will come back, to rule out the possibility that there was fraud happening in just one place. Moreover, he went a step further, and he also enlisted the help of others throughout Europe to also go ahead and ask those same questions in different seances, or we now call mediumship or mediumistic meetings. And all of a sudden, he developed almost like a network of people asking the same questions and sending the answers back. The result of all that, of all these questions, is what we call and see as the Spirit's Book. And it's exactly the reason why we're here today, because what Reveil did was compile all these different answers that came from different places and look at them and see if they matched. If the answers matched for that question, then they were likely to be the truth, because these people did not know themselves or each other. So how could they have coordinated? Remember, this was before the internet. Correspondence was really done by paper. And then we have the Spirit's Book that was born. And a series of very fantastic things start happening. One of those was that when we have this book published, a new way of thinking comes about. Kardec, as we call it, which was the pseudonym or the name that the spirits told Reveil to adopt for this work, because it was not to be his work, because his job was to be the editor of it, but not necessarily to tell us what was happening. Kardec then published this work and called it the Spirit's Book to reflect exactly that this is the result of this research, of these interviews with the spiritual world done by many different people in hundreds of different places, involving thousands of different intelligences, whether they were incarnate, or that is in a physical body, or discarnate without a physical body. And hence we have the Spirit's Book. But what's truly fascinating about that is that the Spirit's Book then marks the beginning of what we call Spiritism. And Spiritism is this very interesting science that Kardec defined once as a science that deals with the nature, origin, and destiny of spirits, as well as their relationship to the physical world. Nowadays, oftentimes I also call that a progressive body of knowledge, because it continues to grow. But the interesting piece here is that Kardec framed this inquiry, this study, this research that was burgeoning at the moment, and that eventually culminated in the Spirit's Book, as a science. It's something that was derived out of research. And that's a fascinating approach, because when we look at it today, we might realize that this was the first time in the history of humanity that we took a scientific mindset to the studies of the beyond. You see, one interesting thing is that all religious thinkings, all religions, and everything that we've had so far have always told us about life and the beyond, but could never really give us definite proof that that was indeed the case. In seldom cases do you actually find direct reports from the beyond. Spiritism, however, was born exactly from the communication from the beyond. This scientific approach led us to understand and hear from primary sources, from people who have been on the other side and were telling us what was happening. And that is one of the reasons why the Spirits book is found in question and answers format. It's not a novel, it's not a work of fiction, it's not a romance that you pick up and read, it's a reference book. Kardec, as an educator, tried to maintain the original and primary source, that is, the question and, in quotes, the actual answer of the spirits. All right, so as we understand the history of the Spirits book, we can understand where Spiritism came from and sort of what it is. But I think you might know all of this. What I want to push our thinking on today is something slightly different. I want us to reflect a little bit about the environment and everything else that came to that, because think here with me. Let's use our brains for a second. What's really distinguishing about Spiritism is the idea that it was born of inquiry. It was a scientific experiment, so to say. Kardec, or Rivel, did not set out to create a body of knowledge, a new science, or a way of looking at life. Kardec simply was asking himself the question, what's happening here? And as each question came about and the answers followed, more questions were also coming into play, and he kept pursuing that. So it's a fascinating approach for us to see that Spiritism never started with the intent of being a religion or anything else. It was the mere curiosity and the desire to understand what was happening in the world that could not be explained, and use our minds and our reasoning and experimentation to do that. So that's a fascinating thing because, as I mentioned before briefly, we have not had any other thinking process that I know of that had applied this kind of thinking to spiritual knowledge. And that's definitely a milestone, I feel, in our history. The second aspect that I think is very interesting here as well is this interesting idea that Spiritism is dynamic, that it continues to grow, it continues to amass information. Because it was started as a progressive body of knowledge, of a science, it started with Kardec, but it did not end with Kardec. It's an open system, so to say. That is, anybody that can continue to and want to continue to add to Spiritism can. And as a matter of fact, we are very fortunate to have had a series of other contributors who continue to perform this exploratory pursuit of knowledge in their communication with the spirits to gain ethical insights as to how we can live better. We have the works of the spirit André Louis. We have famous spirit guides in Brazil and in France, such as Emmanuel. We have great philosopher Emmanuel, Joanna de Angelis, and perhaps a lot more as well. We have great philosophers of early on that also adopted, such as Gabriel Delanne, Leon Denis. We have astronomers such as Camille Flammarion. So there's a bunch of different folks who started to use this perspective to add to this new understanding. And that's really interesting too, because all kinds of thinking processes that deal with spirituality tend to be almost closed by nature. What do I mean by that? That they arrive at some kind of revelation, some kind of knowledge, and then they organize around it and say, this is what our message is, and this is what we are going to stick to. And with the passing of time, institutions, religious institutions get sometimes a little bit inflexible, and they kind of tend to stay put in that specific area. And we all know if we ever play that game of telephone, how the message sometimes loses its meaning over time. Spiritism, on the other hand, being this progressive body of knowledge that's always growing, has always the ability to check back with the original source, which were the good spirits, and accepts change and continues to want to add new information. So the science piece of Spiritism is always asking for more, is always asking questions and seeking answers. And that, I think, is a fascinating piece in itself. Now, the third part that we want to also talk about briefly of Spiritism is a different perspective that we have not had until then as well, which was the collaborative nature of its inception. What do I mean by that? As we talked about the history of the Spirits book, we saw that it took many different people working together in different areas to provide the knowledge and the information that Kardec then compiled and summarized into what we now know as the Spirits book. So it was a crowdsourced in a way, way ahead of its time. It was an approach that required many different people working together, which had never been seen before. Again, I insist on that, in the realm of religious or ethical thinking. And to this day, it continues to be so. It requires us to talk to each other because there are no hierarchies in Spiritism. There is no boss or owner of Spiritism. There's no authority in Spiritism, officially speaking. We all have to collaborate and make sense of the information that comes to us, which is really great in many different ways, but sometimes very confusing too, because we're so used to the idea of hierarchy that when we don't have one, it seems too loose. It seems confusing, but that is done so that we can continue to respect everybody's perspective, and so that everybody has a chance to say what they mean and weigh in by themselves and accept the information that they are learning to discern on their own. And there's also another interesting aspect of Spiritism that I think bears mentioning as well, which is the idea that it's always free and open to all. I talked about open source. This is exactly what it is. Because there is no owner, because there is no copyright, because there is no organization of religious thinking in Spiritism, everything is always done as a free approach to things, because we want to make sure that we don't commit the same shortcomings or the same mistakes that we've done in the past of trying to own the truth. This is not something that we have created, that a human has created, that Kardec has created. It is a collaboration of multiple people, and as such, it doesn't belong to any one person. It is the the ownership is global. It's everybody else. It's universal. Therefore, you cannot put a price on it. You can open that to anybody that wants to learn if they want to do that. So these different aspects are really interesting because they have really led us to a transformative approach. Because all of these examples can be very personal as well. You see, every time that we talk about Spiritism, we're not just talking about the content that we have been able to amass and gather through times through the interaction with the spirits. Of course, the content is great and we love it, and I think we can get a lot of wisdom from it. But Spiritism goes deeper. It's about not just sucking in information, but processing it and applying to our lives. Because now we have information from the other side of life, we can better understand how we should behave in this one. And it's fundamentally different and transformative in that aspect, because we cannot say, oh, I didn't know this, when we get to the other side. Now we know, because we have spirits who are on the other side, who are discarnate, who don't have a physical body anymore, and who have been able to tell us what is it that they've done here and how they feel over there, and how they now regret some of the actions they've taken here, and how are they happy with some of the things that they've sacrificed here and find themselves enjoying that achievement over there. So it's really a different way, because it helps us reframe our relationships. Because, hated to break it to you people, but remember the whole YOLO thing, you only live once? That's actually not the case. So it's actually YDOLO, you don't only live once. So when we actually cut the YOLO part out of our lives, we realize that stepping on each other's toes to get whatever it is that we want in the here and now makes no sense for us in the long term, because there is a long term. And how do we know it? Because the spirits who are just like us tell us how their experiences were. So it's a fascinating aspect that makes us begin to change our approach to things. And here's where I think gets really, really interesting. If we just look at Spiritism as knowledge, right? Even if it's knowledge that is fact-based, even if it's knowledge that is progressive, even if it's knowledge that's collaborative or open source and it's democratic because there's no ownership in Spiritism, and even if it's practical for everyday use, if we are not using that in our lives, then it defeats the purpose. So at its core, Spiritism is about personal transformation. It's not about content. It is about tools. Tools with which we can arrive at our own certainty and our own knowledge. And that's where I think it's really fascinating, because just like the history of the Spirits book tell us that Spiritism was born out of inquiry, a fact-based approach, a progressive mindset, a collaborative endeavor, we can also ask ourselves the question of whether we are truly living in that way. If we are interested in Spiritism, then one thing that we learn is that Spiritism as a whole, the whole science, philosophy, and religion part of it, are really different aspects of this whole purpose of making oneself better, and in doing so, helping those around us, which we take it to be the purpose of life. Not only to evolve individually, but to also play, as the good spirits tell us in a question in the Spirits book, our part in the creation. That we have a responsibility to grow ourselves because we live many lives and we need to kind of continue to move forward. But we also have a responsibility towards creating some sort of positive impact in the world. Otherwise, it will be a selfish approach. So, in that aspect, Spiritism is not a content-making machine itself. It's a lens. It's a pair of glasses through which you see the world. If you are studying Spiritism, you might be fascinated by the wonderful wisdom that we find in these books by these incredible mentors and guides and spiritual mentors and guides and incredible smart people that have put a lot of time and effort thinking through life. And that is fascinating. That's wonderful. But if we're not using this knowledge, this method that we have learned to apply to other things, we may be missing part of it. Because if we're not taking an approach to life that is also scientific, and what do I mean by that? If we're not asking questions and trying to understand the world as a whole, just like Kardec did when he was trying to understand what was happening before he published the Spirits book, we are going to be missing this important piece. So as we sit ourselves today in our homes, how are we using our time? Are we learning something new? Are we trying to get to facts and knowledge about things and not just believe what people tell us, but are we getting to the root cause, and how do we know what we know, and how are we collecting and acquiring knowledge? That would be the scientific aspect of Spiritism. The philosophical aspect of Spiritism is that reflection that follows new information. So if I am asking the world for new information, I need to sit with it. I need to reflect. I need to think about how those different things connect, much the same way Kardec did as well after he got those facts that, in fact, those tables were not moving by themselves and it was happening in many different places, and that the answers he was getting were aligned. He began to think, what does that mean? How does it all come together? And we ask ourselves too, what does all the information that we have in our life come together? How does it all come together? What does it mean to us? How do we connect the dots? That's the philosophical aspect of Spiritism. The religious aspect, which is really the ethical piece, because we don't understand Spiritism to be a religion per se, not an organized religion, because it has no formal structure, there's no rites and rituals, there is no ownership like we talked about. We can understand Spiritism to be a we want to make a distinction between organized religion and religion. I think that oftentimes when we say religion, we mean is organized religion. People who organized around a denomination or a topic and create rules around this. There should be no such thing in Spiritism. Spiritism is a religion in the sense that it connects the individual with the Creator. So in that sense, Spiritism is a religion, but it's not a regular religion as you would see. There are no Spiritist churches. There is no Spiritist habits. There are no Spiritist methods of doing things. There is interpretation from different people about different things, but Spiritism is open to anybody. So on the religious aspect, after we talked about the scientific side of things, and we talked about the philosophical side of things, that is, we ask questions, we get answers, we see how they come together. The most important part for our day-to-day lives is this ethical piece, which is, knowing all of this and knowing how it comes together, what is it that we are changing or doing differently in our lives to be happier? I'll give you an example. We're all in these times of COVID, and we're seeing tons of information floating around everywhere in social media. And many of us are forwarding this information that might not even be true, and that causes panic and fear in many different people because we have not checked the sources. We got something and we passed it on without really asking the question, is it true? Did I see that in different places? Does this make sense? Does this come from a credible source? Right? And if it does, if it passes all this, then I can start to think about this and find out whether that information connects with everything else I know. And if it doesn't, then I need to put an effort into it if I want to learn. And if not, I also need to ask, will it benefit anybody if I share this? Does it add to the world? Right? And the other piece is changing our behavior. Is this new information that we're getting changing our behavior? So we got all these things, we stopped forwarding them because we don't know if they're true or not. We read them, we think that they're good. How are they changing our behavior? How are we becoming better people through that knowledge? Are we perhaps meditating on the content of those things that we're seeing? Are we changing the ways in which we behave? Are we now being more cautious? And are we washing our hands? Are we all wearing our masks when we go in public? Because we've learned that the masks are not always just to protect ourselves, but to protect those who are around us. Because we could have COVID right now, the virus, and be asymptomatic and not have any signs of the virus. And if we don't wear the mask, we might be actually helping it spread to other people, and that could cause harm to other people. So wearing the mask is oftentimes more of a golden rule thing than anything else, where we're learning to be kind to other people and not just be self-centered and self-directed. So yes, we want to protect ourselves, but we also are having to be mindful in changing our behavior about protecting others. So it's an interesting piece, and we can go, do this many times with different relationships. When we hear somebody gossiping about something, do we just pass the message on, or do we actually vet it to see if it makes sense? Do we change our behavior when we hear good criticism or not? So how does it all come together? Because Spiritism is a lens. It's not a knowledge. It's not about sitting and reading things and you're a Spiritist. It's about taking on that personal transformation. It is about putting that method into practice. And as a curiosity, I will show you what I mean about a method, because I really do think that Spiritism is more of a method than it is of content. If we look at, for instance, at that wonderful book that I was talking about, the Spirits book, which you can now find, for download, or you can buy a copy, you can find different versions, whatever one you want to. So you can even read it digitally. So whenever you get that book, if we don't spend our time to actually think about it and think about how it came together, we might miss the grandeur, the beauty of Spiritism as a whole. What do I mean by that? Well, the Spirits book, the collection of all those interviews with the spiritual world, compiled into one beautiful, simple, book by Allan Kardec, is divided in 4 different parts. The first part, you might remember this, is called First Causes. In it, we are going to find basically the scientific piece of how it all started. All the building blocks, the primary questions that help us understand the world in general. So it will start with the basic things such as, what is God? Is there a God? What are spirits? Are there spirits? All these facts that are building blocks for us to be able to then understand things. After we have explored the primary causes, the first causes to things, and how at the very basic level things are, then we can pull in the philosophical aspect of things and begin to think about, how does the world of spirits exist? Now that I have established in part one that there are spirits, my next question is, how does it all come together? How does the world of spirits work? And after we realize that there is a world of spirits and that we too are spirits who are going to leave our physical body and find ourselves in that true reality, how does that change our behavior? Should we behave differently? What are the ethical implications of our lives? And that's the third part of the Spirit's book, which is called Moral Laws. So there is a method here that Kardec is putting forth and organizing and bringing to us to help us not only understand, but to transform our lives too, if we so wish. There's facts, there's the philosophy and how it comes together, there's the implications of that. And there's a third part here, which is a really helpful one too, which is called Hopes and Solaces, which kind of helps us even arrive at our own decision-making process. And in the Hopes and Solaces, we get to learn what will our future look like after we've made choices. So we go back to the structure of the Spirit's book here. What we see is the first building blocks of things at first causes, part one. Part two, we see the world of spirits, how it all connects. Part three, we say, all right, if it all connects, then, and I'm a spirit, how should I live? That's the ethical piece. And part four is, what will happen if I make this decision, or what will happen if I make that decision? That's a method that we can use in our lives. Find the facts of things and ask ourselves, how do I know what I know? Do I need to investigate and gain more knowledge about this before making a decision? After I have all the facts, I can go to the second part and say, how do all these facts come together? Does so-and-so really, has so-and-so really done that, like as I heard, or is that not true? Does that match what I know of them? Do I have all the information to make that decision? And after that, it's still on our gossip network here. We look at how to behave. I've heard this information from somebody who's telling me something about somebody else. Should I really pass that bad information on? Even if it's true, does it warrant me continue to feed into that mentality or not? Right? And then part number four is, well, if I'm not sure how to make the decision, let's imagine that I did. Let's imagine that I did make the decision of passing that gossip forward, or that information that's not necessarily vetted forward. What could be the outcomes? How would that make me feel? How would it make other people feel? And then think the opposite. If I don't pass it on, how would I feel and what would happen? And in having that framework, it might help us make the decisions for our lives in general too. Thinking process, because at the end of the day, as we're talking about here, Spiritism is a science, is a philosophy, and is a religion. That is to say, it's a whole new way of thinking that asks us to ask questions and continue to inquire, to investigate, because the DNA of Spiritism is one of science and inquiry. It's about being curious about the world and wanting to know more. And when we do that, are we pondering and reflecting about things? Are we taking the time to really digest it all and try to bring things together and see then how does the ethical piece come in? How do we apply that in our day-to-day world? Because if we're not doing this, then we might be missing an important part. Even if we have found Spiritism to be amazing and fantastic, sometimes we might be tempted to only live in that space. We might be tempted, for instance, to also only read Spiritist books, only talk about Spiritism, only think about Spiritism. And I'm sure that's a great thing. But Spiritism also asks us to go outside of our comfort zone. So the challenge for those who are already Spiritists and who are interested in Spiritism is, yes, continue to grow your knowledge with Spiritist books and knowledge, yes, by all means. But also take the time to philosophize, to reflect, to investigate everything else out in the world and see how that matches your worldview, how it matches what you believe to be true. Because Spiritism is not something separate from the world. It's not another part of knowledge or a body of knowledge that you learn. You learn biology, you learn physics, you learn communications, you learn philosophy, and you learn Spiritism. It's not a little box that you can put things into. It's a lens, like we're saying. It's a way of applying that knowledge and the method to see everything anew. And if you haven't noticed, there were other books besides the Spirits book that Kardec published as well, and he followed that same pattern. If the first book was the Spirits book that contained all the building blocks, all this quote-to-quote scientific part of Spiritism, the second book was the Medium's book, which was about the spiritual world. It's about how do we get the information for ourselves? How does mediumship work? How does the contact with the spirits work? In a way that demystifies it so that anybody who wants to understand it can. Because Spiritism is about empowering ourselves to grow and learn. And that's the philosophy piece of it, and understanding how things come together. The third book of the Spiritist codification is called The Gospel According to Spiritism, which mirrors the third part of the Spirits book, which dealt with the moral laws. And the fourth book of the Spiritist codification of this first 5 set of books in Spiritism is called Heaven and Hell, which questions this whole idea of either heaven or hell, which is fascinating. But it also has a lot of different messages from those spirits that we were talking about, who are now telling us how are they living in the spirit world after they have discarnated, after they had lost their physical body, so that we can see the before and after. They tell us how their lives was here and how they're feeling in the beyond, so that we can also match it to the fourth part of the Spirit's book, Hopes and Solace, to see the causes and consequences of our actions. So it's a method that Kardec tries to impart throughout his time with us, putting Spiritism forth, and that the spirits were keen to replicate, to teach us a way to arrive at the knowledge for ourselves. And always keeps going, because although there is no fifth part to the Spirits book, we do have a fifth book in the Spiritist codification called Genesis, which is when we go back to all the different things that we have known and reevaluate them with new eyes. We go back to the Bible, for instance, and think about, like, how did the miracles happen? Were they really an intervention from God, or are there other rules and laws that we are not aware of that took place? So all these different things are fascinating, because Spiritism, at the end of the day, it's very fulfilling, but it demands effort. And that's why it's hard, because it's about us learning how to learn, learning how to ask questions almost in a scientific way, to fact find, to make sure that we're always in inquiry mode, that we're always curious, they're always asking and checking to see if things are really what they seem to be, or if there is another explanation. We're never comfortable with Spiritism. Spiritism doesn't let us sit in our comfort zone for too long. It asks of us to continue to ask more questions. It also asks us to be philosophical. It asks us to sit and reflect on everything in our lives and how things come together and how things are, because we cannot learn just by acquiring facts if we are not then meditating and reflecting on them. We need that experience, but we need reflection to make sense of it all. So we also ought to ask ourselves, am I spending enough time thinking about me, about my life, and about higher life now that I know that I'm a spirit and not a physical body? I know that I am a spirit who's temporarily inhabiting a physical body and who has inhabited others before in past lives and will do so again, and not the opposite, that I'm not a body who has a spirit. And I should not just worry about my spiritual life when I'm about to meet my Maker. That we should be thinking about this throughout. And perhaps the most impactful aspect of Spiritism that is hard to do is to think about how we should change our actions and the way we behave now that we have all this knowledge that we have acquired through sweat and tears, that we have reflected upon. How does that change us? How does that make us willing participants of a better day? How does that put us in a position to make a sizable contribution not only to our families who are close to us in these times, but the world in general? So, to make a long story short, I find the publication of the Spirits book a fascinating milestone that often goes unnoticed in our history as a humanity. And I think that one day we are going to begin to give it a little more credence as well. But that's not as important. What is important is for us to know that we have this amazing tool called Spiritism, which is a science that studies the spirit and how it relates to the physical body, to our lives, and what it all means. That we too are beginning to unpack. And we miss a great opportunity if we think that Spiritism is just a set of books or is just something that we can learn by reading. Reading is fundamental and it should be done. Investigating is fundamental and should be done. Questions and answers should still be asked. But we also need to turn inwards and find out how that is actually going to change the way we approach our families who are next to us right now, our larger family who may not be, and our spiritual family, which is everyone around us. Those are fundamental questions that come to mind when I think about science, philosophy, and religion. But I should not forget to say that one beautiful thing about Spiritism, as we wrap up here, before we start taking questions in general, is this idea that when we learn that we are immortal beings and that life goes on beyond our physical body, sometimes that can be scary because we're so not used to thinking about it, right? We spend more times brushing our teeth during our lives and maybe thinking of ourselves as spirits. But when we do realize that we will never cease to be who we are, we may lose our physical body, but we're not going to stop being who we are. It becomes an amazing thing. It becomes a very transformational thing because we begin to notice that there's an incredible love that kind of structures and rules it all, that God is behind all of this, that we're always having an opportunity to engage with people, that we always have an opportunity to learn new things, and even if we fail, we are going to be able to try this again. Because there's this loving aura, this loving force that's guiding us and that's looking over us, and it's giving us as many opportunities as we need, and it's always present, so we're never truly alone. And it's not just a God thing. It's also everybody who's around us, because in these times of COVID, we are very scared of losing our physical lives. You know, this virus has forced us on to reflect. It has kind of put us on a spiritual timeout of sorts, where he sent us, everybody, go back to your homes and think about life for a little bit. But I'm finding that a lot of people are dealing with the fact that they are afraid to die. They didn't think about it before, and that's understandable. But now that we have this information, should we be as scared as we were before, because we know that we will never cease to be? And if that's the case, then should that also quell our fears and calm our hearts a little bit and not let us be so overwhelmed by the negativity and the different kinds of fears and angers and behaviors that are less than exciting out there? There's a lot to think about that Spiritism brings us for these moments, but it all boils down to self-transformation and the belief that there is something greater at play. Not because we think or we wish, because we have proof. Because the greatest gift Spiritism has given us is this method through which we can gain understanding, and mediumship in which we can have proof. And we do that every single week in different groups, where we are able to connect with the spiritual world and we know that they're there. And so are we bringing that knowledge to our lives? Are we bringing that certainty to our lives? Are we transforming ourselves? Are we doing Spiritism justice and giving ourselves an opportunity to grow by remaining always in inquiry mode and open-minded, by reflecting upon things and by really thinking about how is it that we can change ourselves and in so doing, change the world? That's the legacy of the Spirits book, in my opinion. That's the legacy of Spiritism that we have only now begun to understand, that we have only now scratched the surface on its implications and how it can change our lives and it can change our worlds. But it's a wonderful one. And it bears study, it bears reflection. I hope that all of us are taking the time to continue to feed our spiritual selves in this time of reclusion and reflection that this quarantine has placed us in, and that we may continue to have moments like this, when we can talk to each other, talk to friends that are at distance, grow in understanding, exchange ideas and exchange thoughts, and just to be happy. So that's an insight on how the Spirits book comes together and why I think Spiritism is such a fascinating place for us to start our contemplations about life and the spiritual world in general, and ultimately how it can lead us to be more fulfilled and happier, which is ultimately the goal. So I want to thank our friends and see if there's anything else that we might want to touch upon. But I'm very grateful and happy to be here with you, and thank you for your patience listening to me go through all this.
Well, thanks, Dan. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, fantastic. We got some questions. I can put one on the screen from a guy called Jeffrey Hill. Can you read?
Yes. Great. Hey, Jeffrey, thanks for the question. How do we know any of this? Who has confirmed that this was actually happening? That's the beauty. It's a great question, by the way. It's a very Kardecian question that Kardec asked himself too, exactly because of the commonality of the occurrences that the answer comes from. So how do we know any of this? Because we have had a chance to ask in different places at different times with different people who did not know each other the same questions, and we got similar answers. So Kardec called this the universal control of the spirits, this idea that if there is a God and there's order to the universe and it's guided by something greater, that truth is not going to be given just to a group of people in one place or the next. That truth will come in everywhere at any time, because if there is a God, then God loves everybody the same. So you can validate that information by asking it again in different places. Not only at Kardec's time, but even today, Spiritist groups throughout the world carry mediumistic meetings on a weekly basis in which they have confirmation that the spiritual world is influencing and talking to us. So research still continues to take place, and that's how we know that something's sturdy, because our scientific, so to say, approach to things doesn't let us put all our eggs in one basket. Spiritism is not the result of Kardec's mind or one guru or one spirit or one person. It's the amalgamation. It's the grouping of all these different ideas, this crowdsourcing of ideas that come together. And because all of these voices repeat the same thing or very similar things, we're able to triangulate that information and say, okay, we have these different people who are giving us wise answers in 10 different places, and they're all similar, but they don't know each other. That's a sign of concordance, and that's how we do it. It's more than a double blind. It's like a quadruple blind experiment where we're constantly validating the information that was actually happening. So that's how we know, and that's why I think Spiritism is so great, because it lets us rest assured that it's not just somebody who sat down and wrote things and it was somebody's opinion. The name Kardec is in the books because we require an author for a book to be published. But the Spirits book is not done by one author. It's done by many different ones who contributed, sort of like a scientific publication where they all provide data and contribute to create something greater. And so that's kind of personally why I think Spiritism is so exciting, because it doesn't rest on one person, but it's the result of a collective effort by many different people bringing information together, which happens to jive. And when something does not jive, when we get a new piece of information that doesn't fit, then we hold it and set it aside until it does, and if it doesn't, we throw it out. Or if we learn a new piece of information that we thought overwrites something that we learned before, then we toss what we learned before and take that new piece of information on, because it's dynamic, it's growing. That's how Kardec wanted it. Spiritism started with Kardec, but it did not end with Kardec. It continues to grow.
Okay, that's great. We have another question, which I think is a good follow-up. Eleni Bernards.
Hi, Elenir. As a science, is Spiritism still evolving today? How? An example. Yes, Spiritism is always evolving. Every single day we do experimentations. We gain knowledge throughout the world. There are different groups of people studying Spiritism, proposing new ways of looking at life. There is a new research done. There's new writings taking place as a science. So we continue to experiment. However, we may have reduced the scientific aspect ever so slightly, because we have already satisfied ourselves with the idea that the spirits exist. So you may not find a lot of Spiritist efforts which are geared towards showing people that life after life exists. Because we have already established that, we have already satisfied ourselves with proofs in hundreds of times, thousands of times, millions of times that the spirits are there. So we move on to something which we think now is more important, which is how do we live after we've gained proof that there is life after life. And that is sometimes an interesting thing. Like many of our spiritualist friends, for instance, and brothers, still focus quite a bit on what they call, validation mediumship, where they are trying to show people that that we don't die, right? We don't end when we die. So a lot of mediumistic efforts in the spiritualist approach to things, which is not just one approach but many different ones, is still in the phase of, let me show you that the spirit goes on, and that's very important too. But for us spiritists, now that we've are happy with the results, that we are convinced that the spirit life does go on, and the spirits interact with us more than we imagine, as a matter of fact, we're now really searching for answers to ethical questions and problems on how to live and so forth. So yes, and the reason, and one of the proofs that our science still grows is we have an ever-growing number of books that get published on a regular basis. We have different people proposing new ways of looking at lives. We have new books who bring forth new ideas, who review to us different aspects of the spiritual world that we did not know before. A famous series that started in the 1940s was that of the spirit writer Andrea Lewis, who really opened the doors for us to understand in specifically how life in the beyond was for him in one spiritual city that exists. And the idea of spiritual cities is revolutionary for in 1940s, right? So yes, as a science, we continue to ask questions, we continue to get answers, but we are not a test tube science, right? So we don't mix two chemicals with a third and obtain a fourth. We are in the humanities field, so our findings are going to be philosophical and ethical in nature.
That's great. We have, I believe we still have time for one more question, and this one, the person asked not to be identified, but I think it's an important one.
Sure, we can do that. By following Spiritism, sometimes I feel isolated from my coworkers, my friends, and even my family. Why? That is a great question. And I was going to actually add that it's not only by following Spiritism. Sometimes changes in our lives make us feel like we are outcasts or we don't belong. That's a natural process of evolution that doesn't happen only to Spiritists or those who are interested in Spiritism. It happens to anybody who's trying to change their perspective and is thinking about the spiritual world. Because the truth of the matter is that here on Earth, on this planet, we have not yet really dedicated or paid attention to a lot to our spiritual side. So anybody who's trying to make ways and thinking about themselves as a spirit rather than just a physical body might feel out of place, because the majority of us are still sleeping, so to say. We're still not thinking of ourselves as a spiritual being. As a matter of fact, I can point to an example that took place 2,000 years ago. The Christ, the greatest spirit that we have known to have graced us here on this earth, experienced the same problem. He came to show us that we could overcome death, that life goes on. There is no great or more beautiful message that the Christ brought us than the idea that you come back from the dead, that you were not really dead, that he resurrected. And I think that's what he means when we say he resurrected. He shows us that life goes on. Yet, he who lived exclusively on the spiritual found himself very lonely, even to the sense that his closest friends who wanted to understand it were unable to understand where he was coming from. So rest assured that what you are feeling, it's normal. All of us feel it. There is no way for us to avoid it. This walk that we go through is an individual one, and it's a part of life. In fact, I think a lot about the road to Damascus. You're familiar with the Christian history, right? With the walk that Paul, the apostle, did from Jerusalem to Damascus, and how he transformed himself. I'm actually finishing writing a book on that. I love that so much. I think that one of the learnings we take away is that we can be surrounded by people in life, but there's certain moments, key moments, we are going to feel sometimes lonely because we have to make that effort by ourselves. That part of life is an individual sport that we have to kind of grow our knowledge and understanding. but it's a good thing. It means that you're growing, expanding. Every time that we are being pushed out of our comfort zone, even though it may feel painful, it helps us. And if this helps you, I don't know if it might help you feel a little better. Remember that the physical perspective might not be understanding you, but you also have friends in the spiritual realms who are urging you on, who are cheering you on, who are excited about the fact that you have begun to pay attention to spirituality more than the average, more than the norm, and that there's growth ahead of you. So, yes, that's a common thing, but know that there are many other people who are also undergoing the same journey that you are. And when you connect with them, and we do things like this, it's like a breath of fresh air sometimes. We kind of re energize our souls and we remember that we're not alone in this. We're never alone. And that going back to how we were before might not be a great way of living. I don't think we can do that sometimes. So the way is forward. And that means finding other people in which we can rely on as well.
Okay. We do have another person that wants to ask a question. So if the person is able to write, but other than that, we may you actually can follow up then on his channels. You do you want to tell us about the podcast that you have and all the spirits talk and everything you do have there? So share with us
Sure.
everything that is going on there from the other side of the country.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I really have found Spiritism to be transformational for my own life because it opens my minds and I love studying and going with it. So if you want to continue the conversation and talk about this, I have a page on Facebook, Dan Assisi. Just look for Dan Assisi / Dan Assisi. You'll find me there. You can follow. You can connect. I have a Facebook group attached called Ask Dan Anything, which I really enjoy asking people questions sometimes as well. And you can try to find me on Instagram, which I'm trying to learn. I'm not a good Instagram kind of person, but I figured I'd try to learn at Dan Assisi. But I also like bringing people together every once in a while to have conversations because I think Spiritism does that to us. So there is a podcast that we do with friends, and we also have a rotating group of visitors that come in to add in different topics. It's called Spiritist Conversations. You can also find that on YouTube. You can find that on Facebook as well. And you can follow the Spiritist Institute that we are also starting to kind of help promote all these things together. But if you want to continue the conversation, I also should say, here's a group that you can connect with. You can also connect with these guys over here in Connecticut to be part of their activities and follow along. You don't have to follow Dan. You have to follow what works for you. But it's wonderful to come to Spiritist societies like that one because you can talk to people. You can ask questions, right? And when we get back to physically meeting, how wonderful would that be as well? But if you want to connect, I'd be glad to do that via social media. And I'm sure we can bump into each other virtually as well.
That's great, and also we're going to have a Spiritist Symposium, so it's coming up.
Yes,
and you'll be
great
there.
question. Yes, I wouldn't miss it. It was going to be here in California, but with this COVID thing, we're making it virtual, so it's a first for us. But hey, we're gonna go into inquiry mode. We're gonna test new things. This time it's gonna be over two days actually, right? Instead of being in one day, it's gonna be 2 days and virtually. So you'll be able to participate. We have a really cool session that I'm excited about. It's called Ask Me Anything, which is the idea that people can ask their questions and we're going to try to address them virtually too. So we want to engage people and know that that's kind of like the spirit behind Spiritism, if you pardon my joke.
Okay, yeah, that's fantastic. So I hope everybody really enjoy. And Entopia, I think he's still was trying to type his question. But I invite him to follow up with them directly or through us or directly with them. So you can find him, and this is actually not. He put it there. So let me show it to you, and if you have a chance, you can.
Yes. So, hi, Anton. I'm a nurse in a hospital and understating physical health from a spiritual understanding. I find myself being less empathic towards my patient as I can see they are the creator of their disease. How can I stop analyzing through Spiritism and be more empathic? Great question. And a natural feeling to have, because as a nurse in a hospital, you are seeing people at perhaps their less inspiring moment of their lives. So you are being overexposed to a side of humanity that it's not the best, right? And it's only natural because you are human as well that you may begin to resent some of these people who sometimes bring their illnesses through poor behavior and care of themselves, right? It's only understandable. Police officers, for instance, also have the same problem. Oftentimes they lose faith in humanity because they're always called to deal with problems and all they see is people who perhaps are not being nice to each other, and so they lose faith in humanity. So a lot of first responders have these feelings. It's only normal. And if you deal with people in customer service, you might also perhaps have been very annoyed with people. These things are not normal. And I think it's great that you're thinking about them, that you're reflecting, and that you're trying to be more empathetic. I think one way of remembering that, it helps with me, and I think Spiritism helps quite a bit with that as well. I call it the zooming out, is don't just don't think about just that moment when they're saying, but zoom out and think of them as spirits who are also growing and learning, and you as well as a spirit who's also growing and learning. That they also have a mother, that they also have a father, that they also have a lesson that they're meant to learn, that they might be struggling with things at home that we are not quite sure what they are, that have taken precedence over them taking care of their health, or maybe they were never shown how to do it, right? As we zoom out and we understand that everybody is in a journey, and so are we, it might become a little bit better for us to be empathetic. But I would suggest that you also take some time off in terms of downside, because if you're in go, go, go mode, and you might be in go, go, go mode now because of the pandemic, it's really taxing and we forget to think spiritually, right? The physical part of us takes over because we're so used to seeing the physical piece that we forget that we are spirits temporarily here and that we are here to learn and grow. And much the same way other people have patience with us and are empathetic towards us, we can start to practice that. It's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult for you, Anton, because you're seeing that on a daily basis, right? But take some moment to recenter. I do this sometimes with even a couple of minutes a day where when I was in tough situations, I would lock myself in the bathroom because nobody would bother me or work in the bathroom. Hopefully, nobody will bother you in the bathroom. And you can just take a minute to kind of zen out, to make a prayer and remember yourself, I am a spiritual being who's temporarily going to this, and so is everybody around me. They're all at different levels. They're learning different things. They're all fighting a war I know nothing about. How can I honor that and be the best helper for them to overcome this challenging and learn? And hopefully with practice that will help. But we can continue to talk offline as well. But thinking about people spiritually help you take some of the edge off that you're experiencing, especially in these difficult times.
So then, tell me, you are in San Diego. So for you now, is it 5 p.m.?
It's 5 p.m.
Yeah.
Yes.
So normally we would stop 8 minutes ago. And if you have to go, please tell me. But I just happened to see we do have another question. So if you have time,
Yes.
I
I'm
would.
glad to. If that's okay with you guys, yeah.
Yeah, we're fine. So we actually, as you mentioned, so Spiritism has, we do this for free. And so we're using the social media and we're not paying for it. So we can go a little bit over. So let me bring it up the question so you can read.
All right. So I have been dreaming of whom I pray every night. It does not happen to me a lot. So what does that mean? Hi, Anderson. That's a really interesting piece, right? So what I'm understanding here is that you're praying for people and then you're dreaming with them, and that's a wonderful thing in many different ways, because what we learn from Spiritism is that we are spirits in a physical body. When we incarnate, when we are born, we take on this physical body, then that kind of limits our perception because we have things to learn and we don't want to remember everything in the past. We want to start fresh in this new lesson. But an interesting thing happens. Every night when we go to sleep, because our bodies need physical rest, our spirit continues to be active. And so what oftentimes happens, especially when we become more in tune with our spiritual sense, is that at night we can do some escapades. We can leave our physical bodies behind and continue to learn and grow or do whatever it is that we are attracted to. And people who perhaps are not interested in learning and growing, perhaps they won't do that at night. But we also hang out with friends at night. We also take courses and lectures. We also work on things. We also go have fun, depending on our level of interest. The challenge is we don't often remember that when we come back into the physical body because we didn't have those experiences when we were attached to the physical body. So our mind, which is the spirit, has trouble interpreting that back into the brain, which processes our thinkings. So sometimes we have jumbo thoughts, like where you are crazy thoughts, where you're here, you go there, and I think a lot of it has to do with the brain trying to interpret what happened and all these images and so forth. And sometimes it's just the brain processing stuff during the day too. But in your case, it could be that you are sending good positive energy to these people, thinking about them, and after you fall asleep, perhaps you are actually going to meet with them and talk with them. And I am actually of the belief that during this time at COVID, when we're all at our homes and we have been led through the circumstance to be reflective of our family, to be reflective of those who we love, and to focus on the human side of things that sometimes we could have be forgetting a little bit, that at night we might be seeking those people to be together with them. And we might feel a certain sense of relief, but we might not remember why. But we might have visited with them at night, which is a beautiful thing as well. And that's what I mean by trying to understand the spiritual side of ourselves, because there's more to it than we know. And when we know that that's happening, it also brings us quite a bit of comfort. So you're not that far away from those you love. Oh, I can't hear you, sir. Are you on mute?
Yes, I was.
There we go.
So now that's great. And with that, we will close, and we will say thank you then for taking the time. And I know you started at when it was 4 p.m. Your time, and you kind of filled this into your schedule, your busy schedule, and we want to say thank you for doing that. And also, we want to say thank for you guys for watching and also participating and asking questions.
Yeah. No,
So
thank you guys. Thanks for having me. It's a really a great thing to be able to see you and be with you, all the way on the other side of the country. I think it's kind of hard to get a line that's kind of farther away. So what a wonderful time it's been. Thank you for having me, and how great that we can do this, that we can still connect, even if it's virtually.
yeah.
So thank you very much, friends.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. So as Dan mentioned, please feel free to follow him and follow the channels and all the opportunities you have to learn. So this we ended here, but we invite you to tune in. And every first Friday of the month, we have this English lectures and talks. So you can just watch it, participate, and share with your friends and learn more about Spiritism. Thanks, Dan, and thanks, then, everybody, again. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.